everyone, and welcome back to the Couture Masterclass series. My name is Bethany, and today we are going to be talking a little bit about fabric manipulation and how you can use it to enhance your amazing designs. This is really good, especially if you're in the experimental phase, because it can really enhance your designs and really elevate them. And what they do is they take, 2D fabric and make it three-dimensional. So it's really cool and it's really interesting, and it adds a lot of texture and dimension to your designs. And you can do any of these techniques with any type of material that you have. The importance is that you experiment with what works, because a needle might work for regular fabric, but it might not work for bin bags or pieces of plastic or whatever it is that you're using. So do make sure that you have done that sort of test run with the fabric that you're using before you attempt any of these things. Just so you know, preparation is key. So what we're going to talk today about is 4 different techniques. So I'm going to be showing you how to do some Pintucks, some ruching or some gathering, and 2 types of applique. So we have regular applique and then reverse applique. So yeah, let's get started. So to start, guys, you're gonna need a ruler, you're going to need a marker, some scissors, a measuring tape, and your piece of fabric. So today I'm going to be demonstrating on this piece of calico, which is just a light cotton. You can use any material. I do suggest using a lightweight or medium weight material, as the Pintucks can be quite bulky, so you don't want to make it outrageously bulky. So with fabric, usually you can tell which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side. Right side being the piece of fabric that you see on the outside of the garment. But with calico, it's a little bit more confusing as they both look the same. So for demonstration purposes, I am just going to write a or here for right side and a W here for wrong side, just so you know what I'm talking about. The next thing you want to do is you need to figure out how much Pintucks you want and the width that you want them at. So you can decide how big or small you want them to be. It does take a bit of experimenting. You're probably not going to understand what I'm talking about until you do it yourself, but you can make them as big or small you want depending on your design. So for this purpose, I'm going to do 6mm Pintucks. And how you figure out how much you need is you need to multiply it by 2 because it's folded over itself. You figured out the width of the Pintuck that you want, you need to figure out how much space you want in between those Pintucks. So you can again choose anything you want, it's all down to design. For today's purpose, I am going to do 2.5 centimeters in between. And what you do is, now bear in mind, I am using marker because it's easier for you to see. However, when you're doing this, please use tailor's chalk or invisible pen, something that's going to come off the fabric, otherwise you're going to see this. So we draw a line down and then you measure over your desired spacing. I'm going 2.5, and then you go 2.5 again, and again, and you keep going until you have reached the amount of Pintucks that you want. So when you've drawn out all of the spacing, it's time to mark the width of the Pintuck. So I decided that I was going to go 6mm. So at the top of all the lines, just mark 6mm on the right hand side. This will just help you when you're sewing. It'll help guide you because it can be quite easy to go off center and go off the 6mm, especially if you're not that used to sewing. So it just makes things a lot easier. And when you're done the top, I would also mark the bottom. like so. Again, just to make things a lot easier for you. I know this is kind of confusing now, but it'll all start making sense, I promise. Okay, cool. So now we're finished marking everything. And now what I like to do, it's not necessary, but it might be easier for you to have an understanding of where you're going with it. So I like to press, which is just iron, along the marked lines. So I'll just fold it over where the line is and then iron that like so. So quick note, so this is right side facing upwards. When you're pressing it, you're turning it over to wrong side and you're putting the fabric wrong side to wrong side. Does that make sense? And then you're doing it again for this fold. And you can just keep going with all the folds, and it's just to give you, you know, a bit of guidance. When you're all pressed, it should look something like this, with all of the lines folded in the same way, facing upwards on the right side. And now you need to take this to your sewing machine and we'll begin sewing the Pintucks. So guys, when you're ready and everything is pressed, you are ready to go. So you take one of the folded edges, fold it back over where it's pressed, and just place it in the machine and line up the marking of the width of the pin. So for myself, I chose 6mm, but whatever width you chose. And you just put the needle down onto that marking and press down your presser foot. Now it's important here that you try to keep this as straight as possible as you're feeding it into the machine so that you get a straighter line. So don't forget to backstitch and feed it through. Backstitch again, and then lift up the presser foot and cut the threads, and that is your first Pintuck. So as you can see, it's sewn along here and it creates a like stand-up effect, and they can look really cool when they're done in concession. So then you're just going to continue doing that with all of your pressed lines. And make sure that you're putting the needle into the marking that you've done. Make sure the pressed line is still lined up. And the reason I suggest pressing first is because the fabric will easily slip on you. Even that one was starting to slip at the end and I had to refold it. So when you've pressed it, it secures a line for you to make sure that you're sewing properly and it's not going off center. When you're finished, you should have something like this. So all the pins or Pintucks are standing upright along the edge, and it's really cool. It's kind of like this three-dimensional effect. I actually really like the look of them standing up, but it can be kind of hard to sew it into a garment, so it's probably easier for you to press them or iron them to one side and lay them flat. And that's Pintucks. A really cool thing that you can do with this is you can sew along this edge and sew the opposite edge here and there again to create like a rippled effect. I'll show you now. But you can experiment so much with this. It can be a really cool effect. And you know, you can experiment with different widths, different spacing between them. You can make them really large, really thin, all that sort of thing. And you can mix and match the widths to get a really cool effect. So yeah, it's about experimenting and having fun and seeing what you like, I guess. I'll show you really quickly what I mean about the fancy Pintucks. So we're just going to sew along the outer edge in one direction, just straight across. making sure all the pin tucks are the one way. Back stitch and snip. So see the way that's kind of like flatten them down on one side, and then you can flip it and start from the other side and turn it, flatten them the other way in the middle. Give it a snip. See the way that's caused them to go another way, which is kind of cool. Gives it like a warped effect. And then to finish, you can go on this side and then just flatten them the same way you did on the other edge. And there you have it, guys, some fun and quirky Pintucks. They kind of remind me of like fish scales or something, but they're really cool, and you know, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want with this. You can do them in loads of different directions. You can make these really small in different waves and stuff. So yeah, it's about experimenting, having fun, and figuring out what works for your design. Second technique that we're going to do today is ruching, which is basically gathering. And what this does is it creates a lot of volume in places. Bodices, sleeves, whatever you decided to do. So it just creates loads and loads of volume. And how you do this is you get your piece of fabric, you place it into the machine, and you turn your stitch length all the way up to the highest it can go, and you start sewing. But when you start sewing, you do not backstitch. It's the only time you'll ever not backstitch. And what I tend to do is I get my thumb and put it to the back, not, you know, very close to the foot, but just back here at the plate. And I begin sewing and just let it gather by my thumb. Stop, do not backstitch either. Pull a lot of thread out and then snip. So now you've just got a line here in really big stitching. And what you do is you grab one of the threads from a side and you begin pulling the fabric, or the thread and the fabric on opposing ends. So you're creating gathers. Does that make sense? So you're pulling all this fabric that's been gathering, putting tension on this thread, the top thread, and you're just pulling them down. You do have to kind of be careful with this because it's very easy for the thread to snap, so don't be like yanking it if it feels stuck. You have to be a bit more gentle with it. And you can keep going to decide how much gathers you want. So it really depends. You can put this in, this is really nice in sleeves, to be honest. Creates a puff sleeve, which was very trendy as of recently. So now it's all gathered at the top, and you can kind of space it out to make sure it's gathered properly. And see the way it kind of like billows out? It can be a really nice, you know, sleeve, or can go into parts of dresses to create loads of volume. And then when you know that this is the amount of gathering you want, you simply properly sew over it. Make sure you've gone back to your normal stitch length. For me, it's 2.5. And you back stitch. And ta-da! You have gathers.
Okay, so for the next demonstration, I'm going to be showing you how to applique.
And what applique is it is basically, you know, creating a picture or a shape from one piece of fabric and sticking it onto the other. So what you'll need for this is 2 different types of fabric, whatever you choose. I chose to go for this lovely purple wool and, you know, the standard calico, just to show you the difference. And then you'll need a marker, a pair of scissors, and you will also need double-sided interfacing. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID, I could not access any and I ran out. So I just have single-sided fusing, which you can get in all fabric stores and haberdashery stores. And I'm just going to pretend that this is the double-sided interfacing. If you can only access this, you can definitely try it. It's just obviously easier with the double-sided. So yeah, let's get started. I want to make my picture out of this fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a square out kind of in the shape or the size that I want the picture to be. And then we can put this away. So we'll cut this off just to make it easier. So we've got a little square. The picture that I'm going to cut out is going to be in here. And then we grab the facing. For you, hopefully it's double-sided. For me, it's single-sided. And usually with the double-sided, there'll be a piece of paper on one side of the facing, and the other side will be, it will kind of be rough. You'll feel the glue. Same with single-sided, this is kind of soft, there's no paper, but this is rough, so that's the glue side. And you want to take your fabric and place it so that the wrong side of the fabric is facing upwards. And then we are going to cut the facing to a similar size. And then take your iron and press it on. So for this, it is important that you hold the iron firmly in one place to make sure that the glue sticks. And you're holding it for about 5 to 10 seconds on each point and then moving it along. You do have to be careful with the fabric that you choose to use, because if it's super delicate, obviously you can't, you know, put a lot of heat onto it, so it will depend on the fabric you're using. Wool is pretty good, it absorbs a lot of heat. Now, so once that's stuck, that's the fusing onto the wrong side, this is ready to go. So you need to grab your marker and draw the shape that you want. Try to be as accurate as possible. And then you have your shape. So when it's the double-sided interfacing, you would peel off the piece of paper on the back here to reveal the other side of the glue. Unfortunately, I don't, but let's just pretend. So you've peeled it off, it's all exposed, and then you would iron it onto the piece of fabric that you want to put it on. And usually when you have the double-sided, it will stick. Obviously for me, it does not. Oh, but it made a little mark. So when you're done this, it's time to take it onto the machine to secure it down. Even when you have the double-sided interfacing and it's glued on both sides, it's very quickly comes off, especially if it's put in the washer, you know, you're feeling around with it, or if it's honestly just left there, it is going to fall off. So you need to secure it. You can do this by hand too. If you're good at hand sewing, that's no problem. You can use whatever stitch you want. But for me, I'm going to take it over to the machine. Okay, so now that you have your fabric stuck to the other piece of fabric, you need to secure it. And you can choose to do any stitch you want. So you can just do the normal straight stitch, or you could use zigzag stitch. It's all about experimenting and figuring out what's best. I will say that a lot of fabrics sometimes fray when you're doing the normal stitch, so it is easier to do the zigzag to make sure that it doesn't come apart. So for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do the straight stitch, but again, you choose whatever you want to do. I'm just going to lower, ooh, make sure it's threaded would be a good idea. So yeah, lower the needle into the piece of fabric. And we're just going to stitch along the edge to secure it in place. Now, see the way this has a lot of corners? It can be really tricky to know what to do. So when you get down one side and you're coming along where you need to turn it to here, you simply lift the presser foot, pivot it around so that this is straight, lower the presser foot, and then you can go. Again, I like to edge my way, like turn the hand instead of using my foot to make sure that I'm getting, you know, as close to the top as possible. I'm gonna turn it around there. And go again. And you just do that the whole way around. So actually it's important to know when you're pivoting to turn it around, make sure the needle is down in both fabrics, otherwise it's going to move and your stitching will be off. And then just back stitch when you get around to the top. And voila! You have a fully secure piece of applique. This is really great because it makes things very dimensional. So you can really create a lot of texture and volume and just add something different to your garment, which is really cool. And it's very easy to do. And you know, if you can't get your hand on double-sided interfacing like I managed to do it without, and it's totally fine. I would suggest using a zigzag stitch instead though, just to make sure it's not fraying. But you know, it's a very nice way of adding different dimensions to your creations. It can also be done in the reverse, which is really cool as well. And for this you'll take, I'm just going to do it on the same piece of fabric, but you're going to take your foreground and then the background. And again, you'll need the double-sided interfacing. We're going to pretend this is it, and then the background. So you're going to cut these to a similar enough shape. And then on the wrong side of the foreground, you're going to take the interfacing and you're going to press it on. Then then what you're going to do is you're going to draw the shape directly onto, God, this is an awful start, but whatever, onto here. And you're going to cut this out. So I would, you know, snip in the middle and then cut around the shape. So this is all done on the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, so now you have your shape cut out. And then what you need to do is, if this was double-sided interfacing, you would peel off the paper to reveal the glue on this side, and you would press the background color onto this to stick it with the glue. And then it would be stuck, and it's done on the reverse instead of three-dimensional, which is really cool, especially when you've got super thick fabric and it creates such a different layer. And now when you're done this, you need to take it to the machine and do the same with this, stitch it in place along the edges. And then that's it, that's the reverse, and that is the normal. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for being here and following along with me, and I hope you learned something and you're able to take something away from this and really wow the judges and elevate your designs as much as possible. So good luck with everything, and I'll see you soon.